The machine gun chattered like an angry hornet, spitting death from the black slit in the hillside. Bullets whined overhead as I pressed my face into the coral dust, my M2W2 flamethrower heavy on my back. The screams of wounded Marines echoed behind me, while enemy fire pinned us down just 50 yards from the cave entrance. Inside that darkness, Japanese soldiers waited to die fighting, and they were taking as many of us with them as they could. I adjusted my grip on the ignition gun, knowing that in the next few minutes, I would either silence that position forever or become another casualty in this hellish campaign. The date was May 14, 1945, and we were fighting for a hill near Shuri that had already cost us too many good men. 3 months earlier, none of us knew we were sailing toward the bloodiest Pacific campaign of the war. Operation Iceberg, the invasion of Okinawa, began on April 1, 1945, with the largest amphibious assault in the Pacific theater. Over 180,000 American troops would eventually land on this 60-mile-long island, just 350 miles from Japan's home islands. We thought it would be like the other islands, brutal but quick. We were wrong. I was part of the 1st Marine Division, 1st Battalion, 5th Marine Regiment. Back home in Iowa, I'd worked on my family's farm, burning brush piles and clearing fields. The recruiters said my experience with fire would be useful. They didn't tell me I'd be using it to kill men in caves. The landing itself had been eerily quiet. We hit the beaches expecting the usual Japanese welcome: artillery, mortars, machine gun fire. Instead, we found empty sand and abandoned positions. Some of the guys joked about a cakewalk as we moved inland without resistance. The veterans just shook their heads. They knew the Japanese were up to something. Lieutenant General Mitsuru Ushijima, commanding the 32nd Army, had prepared a defense unlike anything we'd faced before. Instead of dying gloriously on the beaches, he'd pulled his 110,000 troops back into the southern part of the island. There, they'd spent months turning every cave, ridge, and hillside into a fortress. The Shuri Line, anchored on the ancient Shuri Castle, stretched across the island's narrowest point like a steel trap waiting to snap shut. For 2 weeks after the landing, we pushed south through relatively light resistance. Then on April 19th, we hit the real defenses. It was like walking into a meat grinder. The Japanese had turned Okinawa's natural cave systems into interlocking fields of fire. Machine guns, mortars, and artillery pieces were hidden in positions carved deep into coral rock. When we attacked one cave, 3 others would open fire. When we silenced those, more positions revealed themselves. The statistics were staggering. In the first month alone, American forces suffered over 35,000 casualties. The Japanese were dug in so deep that conventional weapons barely touched them. Artillery shells would explode harmlessly against cave mouths. Even direct hits from naval gunfire couldn't reach the guns hidden hundreds of feet back in coral tunnels. That's when they started calling for us the flamethrower operators. The M2W2 flamethrower was a terrible but necessary weapon. It consisted of 2 tanks strapped to my back, one filled with napalm, the other with compressed nitrogen to propel the fuel. The whole system weighed 68 pounds when full. The ignition gun in my hands could shoot a stream of fire up to 50 yards, burning at over 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. It was designed to do one thing: clear fortified positions that couldn't be taken any other way. My first taste of cave warfare came on April 25th during the assault on Kakazu Ridge. The Japanese had honeycombed the entire ridge with caves and tunnels. Our company had been trying to take one particularly stubborn position for 3 days. The cave mouth was maybe 4 feet high and 6 feet wide, cut into solid coral about halfway up the ridge. Machine gun fire came from it constantly, and every time we tried to advance, grenades would roll out to explode among our men. "Henderson," Sergeant Martinez called out. That wasn't my real name, but it's what I'll call myself here. "Get that torch up here." I crawled forward through the rocky debris, my flamethrower clanking against the coral. The other Marines laid down covering fire, their M1 Garens cracking rhythmically as they tried to suppress the Japanese position. Bullets snapped overhead, close enough that I could feel the heat of their passage. 20 yards from the cave, I could see muzzle flashes winking in the darkness. The Japanese inside were probably part of the 62nd Division, elite troops who'd been preparing these positions for months. They knew we were coming, knew what I was carrying, and they were determined to take me with them. "Covering fire," Martinez shouted. The volume of American fire doubled. Bars, M1s, and .30 caliber machine gun all opened up, pouring rounds into the cave mouth. The Japanese fire slackened momentarily. I rose to one knee, aimed the ignition gun, and pulled the trigger. The napalm erupted from the nozzle like a liquid dragon, arcing through the air in a stream of orange death. It splashed against the cave mouth and flowed inside like burning water. The screaming started immediately, high, desperate sounds that cut through the noise of battle. The machine gun fell silent. Black smoke poured from the cave entrance, carrying the smell of burning fuel and worse things. "Position secured," Martinez called out. We'd taken the cave, but I felt no joy in it. War had turned me into something I never wanted to be, a man who killed with fire. But on Okinawa, there was no other way. The Japanese defenders would fight to the death in every cave, every tunnel, every bunker. Conventional weapons couldn't reach them. Only fire could. The campaign continued through April and into May. The Japanese defense was unlike anything American forces had encountered. They'd created what they called Hakoichu positions, literally meaning the whole world under one roof, cave systems so extensive that entire battalions could move underground without being seen. General Ushijima's strategy was working. American casualties mounted steadily. By early May, we'd lost over 65,000 men killed and wounded. The Japanese had lost more, but they were making us pay for every yard of coral rock. The worst part was the waiting. Between assaults, we'd huddle in foxholes carved from the coral, knowing that somewhere in the darkness ahead, enemy soldiers were preparing to kill us. The Japanese would attack at night, infiltrating our lines with small groups of soldiers carrying satchel charges and grenades. They'd crawl through the coral until they found our positions, then detonate themselves among us. On May 3rd, the Japanese launched their largest counterattack of the campaign. Over 5,000 troops from the 24th Division came streaming out of caves and hidden positions, trying to break through our lines. They attacked in waves, some carrying nothing but bamboo spears and swords. American artillery and machine gun fire cut them down in heaps, but they kept coming. I watched from my position as wave after wave of Japanese soldiers ran into our fire. They fell by the hundreds, their bodies piling up in front of our lines like cordwood. The attack lasted all night, and by dawn, over 4,000 Japanese lay dead. It was their last major offensive of the campaign. But the cave fighting continued. Every day brought new positions to clear, new tunnels to burn out. The Japanese had prepared for this type of warfare extensively. Each cave was stocked with food, water, ammunition, and medical supplies. Some positions could hold out for weeks, even when completely surrounded. That's what made the flamethrowers so essential. We couldn't wait weeks to starve them out. The campaign needed to keep moving. Fire was the only thing that could clear a position quickly and permanently. The napalm would flow into every crevice, every hiding place, consuming the oxygen and making the caves uninhabitable. The Japanese called us Hai no Kami, fire demons. They'd never faced flamethrowers in such numbers before. American forces deployed over 700 flamethrower operators on Okinawa, more than in any previous campaign. We were organized into specialized assault teams, each with riflemen to provide security and engineers to seal caves after they were cleared. By May 14th, we were fighting in the hills around Shuri Castle itself. The ancient fortress sat atop a commanding hill, surrounded by a maze of defensive positions. The Japanese 32nd Army had made it the cornerstone of their defense, and General Ushijima himself had his headquarters in caves beneath the castle. That morning, our company was assigned to clear a series of caves on Hill 60, a coral ridge about 800 yards southeast of Shuri Castle. Intelligence reported at least a company of Japanese defenders, maybe 150 men, dug into positions that had been prepared for months. The assault began at 0600 with a barrage from the battleship USS New Mexico offshore. Her 14-inch guns pounded the ridge for 30 minutes, the concussion of each shell shaking the ground beneath our feet. When the barrage lifted, we moved out. The Japanese let us get within 100 yards before they opened fire. Machine guns chattered from hidden positions. Mortars began dropping rounds among our advancing troops, and rifle fire cracked from seemingly empty coral formations. We hit the dirt and began the deadly process of locating and eliminating each position. That's when I saw the cave that would haunt my dreams. It was about 50 yards up the slope, a black slit in the coral maybe 3 feet high and 4 feet wide. Muzzle flashes winked from the darkness as a Japanese machine gun, probably a Type 96, sent bursts of fire down the slope. 2 Marines had already been hit trying to approach it. Henderson, Sergeant Martinez called out again, that position stopping the whole advance. I checked my equipment one more time. The napalm tanks were full, the nitrogen pressure was good, and the ignition system was functioning. Around me, my squad mates were laying down, suppressing fire, their weapons creating a constant crackling roar. The crawl forward seemed to last forever. Every yard brought me closer to that machine gun, every rock and coral outcropping potentially concealing another enemy position. The Japanese in the cave could see me coming, I was sure of it. They were probably waiting for the perfect shot, letting me get close enough that they couldn't miss. 30 yards out, a grenade rolled from the cave mouth. I flattened myself behind a coral boulder as it exploded, fragments whining overhead. The machine gun resumed firing immediately, traversing back and forth across our positions. 20 yards. I could hear voices from inside the cave now, Japanese soldiers calling to each other, coordinating their defense. They knew what was coming. They'd seen what flamethrowers could do to cave positions. But they weren't running. They were going to fight to the end, just like every other Japanese position we'd encountered. 15 yards. The machine gun had stopped firing directly at me, concentrating instead on the Marines providing covering fire. This was my chance. I rose to one knee, shouldered the ignition gun, and took careful aim at the cave mouth. The napalm stream arced through the air like a comet, trailing orange fire and black smoke. It struck the cave entrance and splashed inside, liquid fire flowing into the darkness like burning honey. The machine gun fell silent instantly. Then the screaming began. The sounds that came from that cave were unlike anything humans should make. High, desperate shrieks mixed with deeper moans of agony. The napalm was doing its terrible work, consuming oxygen and flesh with equal efficiency. Black smoke poured from the entrance, carrying the smell of burning fuel and human flesh. I fired another burst, then another, making sure the napalm reached every corner of the cave. The screaming continued for perhaps 30 seconds, then gradually faded to silence. The position was neutralized. "Cave secured," Martinez shouted. But I remained crouched behind my boulder, staring at the smoking cave mouth. Somewhere in that darkness, Japanese soldiers lay dead or dying, killed by fire I had unleashed. They'd been young men like me, fighting for their country as they understood it. The war had made enemies of us, but that didn't make their deaths any less real or terrible. This was the reality of cave warfare on Okinawa. There was no glory in it, no heroic charges or dramatic victories. Just the methodical, terrible business of burning men out of holes in the ground. It was necessary, the only way to end the resistance and save American lives, but it left scars on the soul that would never fully heal. The assault on Hill 60 continued throughout the day. Cave after cave fell to American flamethrowers, each position cleared with the same terrible efficiency. By evening, the hill was ours, but the cost had been high. Our company had lost 8 men killed and 23 wounded. The Japanese defenders had been almost completely wiped out. Intelligence later confirmed that over 140 enemy soldiers had died in the caves and tunnels. This pattern repeated itself across the entire Shuri Line. American forces would advance against seemingly empty positions, only to be stopped by withering fire from hidden caves. Flamethrower teams would move forward under covering fire, burn out the positions, and engineers would seal the caves with explosives. Then the advance would continue to the next ridge, the next hill, the next set of caves. The Japanese defense was incredibly sophisticated. Many cave systems were connected by tunnels, allowing defenders to move between positions without being seen. Some caves had multiple entrances, so even if we cleared one entrance, enemy soldiers could reoccupy the position from another direction. The Japanese had also prepared numerous spider holes, small fighting positions barely large enough for one man, that could be overlooked even after thorough searches. But American firepower and tactics were evolving too. Flamethrower teams began working in coordination with combat engineers, who would use explosives to collapse tunnels and seal cave systems permanently. Tank-mounted flamethrowers, the Zippo tanks as we called them, could approach positions too dangerous for infantry to attack. Naval gunfire was coordinated with ground assaults to suppress Japanese positions while flamethrower teams moved into range. The psychological effect on Japanese defenders was enormous. Many had never seen flamethrowers before, and the weapon's reputation spread quickly through their ranks. Some positions would surrender rather than face the fire, almost unheard of in previous Pacific campaigns. Others would detonate their own explosives rather than be burned alive. American intelligence intercepted radio messages between Japanese units describing flamethrowers as devil weapons and reporting heavy losses to fire attacks. General Ushijima's staff noted in their battle reports that American flamethrower tactics were extremely effective against cave positions and were causing severe morale problems among the defenders. The effectiveness of flamethrowers was reflected in the casualty statistics. In the first month of the campaign, when cave fighting was at its worst, American forces were suffering casualties at a rate of nearly 3,000 per week. As flamethrower tactics improved and more operators were deployed, this rate decreased significantly, even as the fighting remained intense. By late May, the Shuri Line was crumbling. American forces had cleared thousands of cave positions, each one burned out by flamethrower teams like mine. The Japanese 32nd Army was being systematically destroyed, cave by cave, tunnel by tunnel. General Ushijima finally ordered a withdrawal to the southern tip of the island, abandoning the positions his men had spent months preparing. The fall of Shuri Castle on May 29th marked the end of organized Japanese resistance in central Okinawa. American troops found the ancient fortress largely destroyed by naval gunfire and bombing, but the cave system beneath it was still intact. It took 2 full days to clear all the tunnels with flamethrowers and explosives. But the Japanese weren't finished. They'd prepared final defensive positions in the caves and cliffs of southern Okinawa, and the fighting continued into June. The last organized resistance ended on June 18th, when General Ushijima and his chief of staff committed ritual suicide in a cave overlooking the sea. Even then, small groups of Japanese soldiers continued to fight from isolated cave positions. The final statistics of the Okinawa campaign were staggering. American forces suffered 82,000 casualties, including 12,300 killed in action. It was the costliest Pacific campaign of the war. But Japanese losses were even more severe, an estimated 110,000 military personnel killed, along with perhaps 100,000 Okinawan civilians caught in the fighting. The majority of Japanese military casualties occurred in cave fighting. American after-action reports noted that flamethrowers were used to clear an estimated 7,500 cave positions during the campaign. Each position required multiple attacks to ensure complete clearance, meaning that flamethrower operators like myself fired tens of thousands of individual bursts during the 3-month battle. The psychological impact extended beyond the battlefield. Japanese military leaders studying the Okinawa campaign concluded that their cave defense strategy, while costly to the Americans, was ultimately futile against flamethrower attacks. This realization influenced their planning for the defense of the Japanese home islands, where American invasion forces would have faced even more extensive cave systems. For us flamethrower operators, the campaign left lasting scars. We'd done necessary work, probably saved thousands of American lives by ending Japanese resistance quickly and efficiently. But the memories of those burning caves, the screams echoing from the darkness, would stay with us forever. War had turned ordinary young men into killers, and some of us would spend the rest of our lives trying to forget what we'd been forced to become. The atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945 ended the war before American forces had to invade Japan itself. Those of us who'd fought on Okinawa understood what that meant. We'd seen what Japanese defenders could accomplish with sufficient preparation and determination. An invasion of Japan would have required clearing millions of cave positions, each one defended as fiercely as those we'd encountered on Okinawa. The flamethrower had proven itself the most effective weapon against fortified cave positions, but at a terrible cost to those who wielded it. We'd won the battle, helped win the war, but we'd lost something of ourselves in those coral caves. The young farm boy from Iowa, who'd enlisted to fight for his country, had died somewhere in the smoke and flames of Okinawa, replaced by a man who knew too much about killing and death. Years later, when people asked about the war, I'd tell them about the courage of the Marines I served with, about the incredible bravery of men who charged machine gun nests and held positions against overwhelming odds. I'd talk about the technical challenges of cave warfare, the tactical innovations that won the campaign, the strategic importance of Okinawa to the eventual victory. But I'd rarely mention the flamethrower. That weapon, and what it forced us to do, belonged to the dark corners of memory where veterans keep the things too terrible for civilians to understand. We'd done what was necessary, what our country asked of us, but the price was measured in more than blood and treasure. It was measured in the pieces of our souls that we left behind in those burning caves. The Battle of Okinawa proved that American forces could overcome any defense, no matter how well prepared or fiercely defended. But it also demonstrated the terrible cost of such victories. The lessons learned in those coral caves would influence American military strategy for generations, shaping how we thought about warfare, about the weapons we developed, about the price of victory in modern combat. As I write this now, decades after the war, I can still smell the napalm, still hear the echo of screams from darkened caves. The nightmares have faded somewhat, but they never completely disappear. That's the burden carried by those of us who wielded the fire. We won the war, but we lost something precious in the process. The young men who landed on Okinawa's beaches were not the same men who left the island 3 months later. War had changed us forever, and no victory, however necessary or complete, could give us back what we'd lost in those burning caves. The Japanese had prepared their cave defenses expecting to make the Americans pay a terrible price for victory. They succeeded beyond their wildest expectations, but not in the way they'd hoped. The price wasn't just in American casualties, though those were heavy enough. The deeper cost was in what the war forced us to become, what we had to do to achieve victory. Every cave we cleared, every position we burned out, every scream that echoed from the darkness, took something from us that could never be replaced. But we did our duty. We won the battle, helped end the war, and came home to build the peace our sacrifices had made possible. That has to count for something. That has to make the terrible memories bearable. We were ordinary young men asked to do extraordinary and terrible things, and somehow we found the strength to see it through to the end. The caves of Okinawa are silent now, filled with coral sand and forgotten by most of the world. But those of us who fought, they will never forget the lessons learned in that crucible of fire and blood. We learned that victory sometimes requires becoming something you never wanted to be. We learned that the cost of freedom is not just measured in lives lost, but in the things we're forced to do to preserve it. And we learned that even necessary wars leave scars that never fully heal. That's the real story of the flamethrowers on Okinawa, not just the tactical success or the strategic impact, but the human cost of victory. We won the battle, but we paid for it with pieces of our souls. That's the price of war, the real price that's rarely mentioned in the history books. And it's a price that those of us who paid it will carry until our dying day.